So it's by Venom for Venom. It's just all carnage. All 5 stars. All over.
I have long suspected that Venom has actually like infiltrated Luke.
That's what great art does, Jess.
I want my brother back.
Hello, I'm Luke Dunne, and I'm the head writer of filmindublin.ie, and we are here to talk about our best movies of 2021.
So number 5 for me was Sound of Metal, directed by Darius Marder and starring Riz Ahmed, Olivia Cook, and Paul Raci. This tells the story of Riz Ahmed's character, who is a drummer in a heavy metal band, and he starts to lose his hearing, which is obviously a really difficult experience to go through as a musician. And I just really liked it. I thought it was really good, although it is made very much with a hearing audience in mind. They did use a lot of deaf and hard of hearing actors, which is always good. There was a little bit of controversy over not casting someone who is deaf or hard of hearing in the starring roles. I'm not really going to speak to that, but what I thought was good about this is it kind of delves into the story of someone acquiring a disability without being all doom and gloom and kind of going the me before you route of, you know, this being the worst thing that could possibly happen to you. It kind of brings him through his journey of self-acceptance and realizing, you know, how to live his life differently and how to learn to live differently and, you know, pursue other passions in a different way and move away from the view that he would have had before of this being the worst thing that could possibly happen, and just learning to kind of to deal with his new reality. I thought was a really interesting approach to that kind of story. Really great acting as well, and just a really well told story. You kind of have it move through you know, the kind of acquisition of language, like he's not able to hear, but he also doesn't have sign language, so that's a difficult and kind of unusual experience that we might not always think about. So I thought that was really, really good. Number 4 for me was Passing, directed by Rebecca Hall and starring Ruth Negga and Tessa Thompson. Really great film. I really liked that it wasn't just in black and white. It kind of felt like a classic Hollywood movie in a lot of ways, from the kind of sound design and the music used, and even just the way it's shot. The cinematography of it just felt like properly kind of in that time period, which I really liked, and a really kind of compelling story. It kind of makes you feel like you're watching a thriller, but in not in a standard way. So I thought that was a really interesting approach. Number 3 for me was Pieces of a Woman, directed by Cornell Munroe, starring Vanessa Kirby and Sheila Buff. And this tells the story of a woman who is having a home birth, and unfortunately the baby doesn't survive, and it's her kind of trying to grapple with that and deal with her grief and not being able or not feeling able to kind of connect with her partner on it, and feeling like nobody around her really understands her experience or wants her to talk about her experience or understands what she's going through. And obviously it's a topic that we don't kind of always know how to talk about or handle very well. So I thought that was a really great film. It's really well shot. It's really fantastic acting in it as well. Number 2 for me was West Side Story, surprising no one that I have a Spielberg on my list. Starring Ansel Elgort, Rachel Zegler, Ariana DeBose, David Alvarez, Mike Fast, Rita Moreno, like everyone in the film you could say is starring in the film. It's a fantastic, well-acted film. The costume design is amazing from Paul Tazwell, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Just a really fantastic film, and such incredible acting from it. I think it also avoids the trap of sometimes when films adapt musicals or plays, they can kind of not really know how to use the medium. Like they either kind of, it just feels like a play that's just been filmed, or it feels like a film and doesn't always know how to kind of bring or or marry the elements of the musical or the stage play. I felt like this did an amazing job of doing that, and it kind of nearly has a dissonance between the two, which I think works really well for West Side Story because it already has that real kind of clash in tone. So number one for me was Last Night in Soho, directed by Edgar Wright and starring Anya Taylor-Joy and Thomasin McKenzie. It tells the story of a is it costume design or fashion? It tells the story of a fashion student, aspiring fashion student who's just moved to London, and she has some kind of difficulties with her mental health, and she moves to London for the first time, and she's kind of finding that quite difficult to deal with. And it also then tells the story is set in kind of 1960s London, and it's a bit of a noir. We're not really sure what's going on or what the connection is with Thomasin. And it's really slick, really gorgeous film, gorgeous lighting, cinematography is amazing. The costuming also is incredible, and really compelling story, really well told, and just the pacing of it, everything. I just thought it was really fantastic film. So that was the standout of the year for me. So that's me done.
Where does Last Night in Soho rank amongst your Edgar Wright picks?
Would definitely be my favorite. I think, you know, he said he wanted to make that film for a really long time, and I think that really shows. I think he wouldn't have been able to make that film until the point that he kind of got to in his career. Like, I don't think he would have been able to kind of pull it off had he not done Baby Driver and other things. Like, definitely think the camera work in it is just incredible, and all the use of the mirrors, and it just really blew me away. So I did actually have some honorable mentions, which I forgot to get into. So Malignant was a big one for me because it wasn't even a film that like I personally connected with that much. Like, I wouldn't have watched it and maybe thought like, oh yeah, that was definitely for me, but I just thought everyone should watch it, and I was telling people to watch it and telling them like, don't look at anything to do with it. And I was really excited to see a film like that where it does get people talking in that way, and it's that kind of, you know, we don't see that really happen that much anymore, even though you have all this obsession over like no spoilers and blah blah. Like, it's one of those films that really gets people speaking and gets people excited, and it just did really kind of brave, wacky decision making that even where I didn't agree with it, because a lot of it I don't necessarily think I did agree with, I just was so excited to see it and see something creative and see something different, because we just don't get enough of that really anymore with the dominance of the House of Mouse. Green Knight was another big one for me, and again, I think the reason that I liked it so much was because it's not so literal. We've gotten into this thing where cinema has to be very kind of didactic almost, and we want it to kind of be like, this is how people should live or behave, or this is how a story should be told, or we only want certain kinds of characters. And Green Knight, you know, not only is it adapting obviously a 14th century poem, like it tells it in the way that 14th century stories were told, where things aren't always literal and you're not always sure what the point being made is until it kind of comes together. And it's not trying to really kind of debate with you. It's just telling the story that it's telling. I really appreciated that. And then another big one for me was Inside. I didn't want to put it in my top 5 because it's not maybe a favorite film. It doesn't make you feel very good, but I thought it was just a really great at capturing the kind of feelings that we all went through at the time. And I know it's definitely a hard watch, but really catchy songs regardless.
I want to thank you for putting it in your honorable mentions and not your list, so that we don't get emails saying it's not a film. It's not a feature film.
It is a film. It is a feature film because, you know, it's telling a story. It's not like just a collection of songs. It's telling that, you know, it is a narrative. It has a beginning, middle, and end. Now, we don't want to get into debate about what a film is or what includes film or what film covers. So, but yeah, really thought Inside was incredible.
It's funny you say it because I think it was around the time it came out, someone tweeted, "Oh, should Inside be considered for best documentary or best feature or something like that?" I personally don't, but I think it can go for as many Emmys as it wants, and you know, all that, absolutely. And I really enjoyed it. But it was like even the Safdie brothers were going to bat for it and saying, yeah, it should, like it absolutely should. It has its finger on the pulse and everything. And in fairness, no more than anything else I saw this year, it has its finger on the pulse for this current climate. So Yeah, but I think I agree with you, Luke, which is like, it's definitely an honorable mention. Because it's like, do you remember the Sight and Sound list when they put
Oh
Twin
god.
Peaks on it and how the internet exploded over
It's
that?
I mean it's just not a it's just not something you want to rake the coals over again. But I think the funny thing about stand-up specials is that the ones that are, I think the best ones tend to slide into the film category anyway. Like Raw is always thought of in the same way as films are, in ways that other stand-up specials aren't. And Inside is a lot more visual and a lot more inventive in terms of how it's filmed than a lot of stand-up specials are. So I think it certainly is. It definitely counts. It's not a TV show, so therefore, it's automatically a film.
It's not on a TV and it's not a show, so
It's a film out of New Zealand. It's a kind of a horror thriller slash film made by James Ashcroft, based on a short story of the same name. It's Coming Home in the Dark, which revolves around a kind of family of four going on a kind of expedition slash kind of weekend trip away in a kind of mountainous area. And they come across having a picnic to these, what they call in the kind of biopic drifters, two kind of men that are kind of elusive and mysterious in terms of they seem to know who the main protagonist, the father, is, but for reasons unknown. And after one or two extremely brutal and shocking scenes, major events happen and kind of change things in terms of having them go on a journey together, with the family and the two drifters literally go on a car ride, which revolves around basically coming to terms with what one of the family members did in the past. And it's very intriguing. It kind of has themes in relation to things that are quite close to Ireland in terms of kind of institutional abuse in the past and atonement, I guess, and recanting for past kind of crimes, I guess. But ultimately, it's quite a kind of suspenseful, but not too gratuitous in its violence thriller. Kind of low key in its release, but definitely worth watching if you can. That's Coming Home in the Dark. 4 for me is A Quiet Place too. I actually have two kind of what you might call blockbusters on this film list, but ultimately I saw it in June. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was actually kind of more enjoyable for me on a personal level than the first one was by John Krasinski. I think everyone's great in it. The standout being, I think, Millicent Simmons, who was a deaf character. And I mean, I think it was, in context, a pretty good year for representation of deaf people, probably in cinema, with this, and Riz Ahmed as well. So, fantastic kind of, yeah. Well, fantastic kind of set pieces, design of the kind of the horrors of what this world actually kind of tries to construct. And acting is fantastic all around. It's not too overlong as well. It's a good kind of hour and a half on the dot, which is always a nice sign because it's not too, at its welcome. But fantastically enjoyable. I thought it was great from start to finish, and kind of like a summer kind of popcorn, if you want to call it that. Kind of blockbuster, but really good fun. It was hard to kind of do the next three, but 3 for me is Hand of God by Paolo Sorrentino. I actually saw it quite recently, and I've obviously seen in the past, more recently, Laurel and The Great Beauty a few times as well, which obviously won the Oscar for Best International Film in 2013-14. And I think I actually enjoyed this more than I did in the past films from Sorrentino, because it's a bit more lean in terms of its organization. It isn't too messy in terms of its structure. Like in the past, for example, Laurel, I think was meant to be 2 films and was condensed into one kind of 3-hour, I guess, kind of epic but somewhat scatterbrained, narrative. But it basically is kind of that kind of telling of a story, which is obviously quite personal to the director, of a young boy in Naples and Naples and his family around him, and kind of his kind of introduction into cinema and wanting to make films, and all of that kind of coinciding in the context of Maradona coming to Napoli and the kind of hysteria around that. It's really well, it looks great, it sounds fantastic, and as usual with his films in Sorrentino, it's quite, quite stylish and quite kind of fun to go along with, and quite humorous in its own kind of Sorrentino way as well. So definitely a good one there for Hand of God. 2 for me is Dune. I was never really a fan of Dune or kind of any kind of related stories. I hadn't seen the old one by David Lynch, but I definitely enjoyed this one by Denis Villeneuve. it was just so enjoyable. And some of the acting was very good. I think it was very good casting, especially from Timothée Chalamet and, Oscar Isaac. But ultimately, with Dune, I just thought that having not known much, going into it, the backstory with the whole kind of Atreides family and everything else, it was so well done. And set pieces and the kind of effects of these sandworms in particular are worth going to alone. It was just amazing watching those kind of come to life essentially in those main scenes. Definitely worth seeing on that basis alone. And aside from that, it was a very kind of intriguing part one to this story, and hopefully part two is as good, or does what it needs to do in the time it has, I guess, in the next part two. And one for me is The Green Knight by David Lowery. Remember, I loved The Witch a few years ago from Robert Eggers, and actually in the first scene or two, there's a few kind of visuals and soundtracks which is quite like The Witch. Then I saw Ralph and Kate Dickey in there as well, so it's quite kind of similar in that way. But it was, a kind of well-told story, which is obviously quite kind of old in its kind of origins and derived from a kind of poetic kind of background, but it was told very well in a kind of interesting way. And more importantly, even as I saw it on a kind of small screen, it looked amazing. It was mossy, earthy, green, and it came to life so well. There was a great sense of place and description there, as opposed to having a kind of fancy epic thing told via massive set pieces with action and green screens. It was just there and then in the place. It was artistic, and it was so kind of immersive in terms of where you actually were watching it yourself. So all of them are great. Aside from that, I enjoyed also during the year White Tiger on Netflix. These could also be kind of 3-part series of Fear Street was a great kind of fun horror thing to go along with, I think. I liked also Rose Plays Julie. And there's a few more I have to kind of catch up on in the next few weeks from the last year, but those 5 are the best from my personal experiences in the last year or so.
Nice.
I loved Fear Street as well. Particularly the first one, and again, it's just, I think this has been a big year for like neon lit, kind of stylish, slick storytelling, which I think there's a big appetite for at the minute. That kind of 80s style, I don't know, we all seem to be wanting at the minute. So yeah, that's definitely a good one. The thing that I loved about The Green Knight, like you were saying, Ethan, is just it was beautiful. Like there's so many stills from it that just look like paintings. It's just gorgeous.
I have to say, just to be the devil's advocate, I really like The Green Knight, and like probably one of, like, I always refer to it as my favorite movie, or at least one of my favorite movies, is A Ghost Story by David Lowery. I think he's incredible, and The Old Man with the Gun and Ain't Them Body Saints are also 2 incredible films. So I was super pumped to see The Green Knight. I have to say it narrowly avoids like my top 10 solely because I think as a spectacle it's fantastic, it's beautiful, it's incredibly, like, you want to say illustrated because it feels like it's literally hand painted. Like it's absolutely incredible. The one thing I felt about it though is because I think it's an easy target for some hate because it's so beautiful on the surface, and I feel like the story, to me at least, wasn't deep enough that you can kind of critique of it of being, oh, it's just all surface, etc. I don't think I fully buy into that, but despite an incredible performance by Dev Patel, which will sadly probably get overlooked by awards people for all it matters, I just didn't buy into the story as much. Like, I was happy to sit back and watch it, and I think potentially I was tampered by not seeing it in the cinemas because it came out like by the time I saw it, it was out on VOD, so I was watching it that way. And potentially it would have been another half a star or a star if I'd watched it in the cinema. But yeah, that was like, but I agree people should absolutely see it. But it's just interesting because it's kind of a different take from myself.
It's funny you say that because I studied Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, so I feel like I had a lot of kind of background contextual knowledge to it that definitely made it, I think, a richer experience. To kind of, because one thing that I thought was really interesting was the kind of misdirect that it kind of does with the ending. I thought that was really good at kind of filling in the blanks a little bit for that, as to, why is he going through with this? Because it is, it's all about chivalry and the duty of a knight and the kind of godly duty and the kind of honourable, is so important. And I think that was a really interesting way for them to kind of get that across without having to do too much of it, because you don't want it to be kind of too much exposition, I suppose. So, but yeah,
I was going to say, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's funny because I think the Green Knight packs in so much of the personal element of the story in the last maybe 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes,
100%.
which I think a lot of people by then are like, well, there's no character stuff here. But it's definitely it's a very rich one. I think there's a lot to dig into, and some people don't always want to go digging too much, which is understandable, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like, the thing I'd say is, like, that misdirect at the end, without giving away any spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it, like, actually, when it starts happening, my heart sank. I was like, no, please don't.
Yeah.
And then when it, like, it goes the other way, like, I was like delighted. It ended the movie on a really positive note, because I think, okay, like I know the film like stuck to the principle of what I was trying to get across, right? So I loved it in that regard, and it's still like it's a 3-star to 3.5-star for me. I still really liked it, and I like rich visually completely. I don't know, I just felt like it maybe lacks that real deep kind of driving emotional element underneath to kind of really make it a superb film for me. But look, largely shot in Ireland, if not completely. So for that alone, it's worth seeing.
I didn't know that. It probably would have been on my list if the fox at any point had been a genuine fox. I looked it up and it's purely CGI, and I was so disappointed, which is probably unfair.
Why don't they train the foxes to talk? There's just not enough ambition in Hollywood these days.
That's so much to ask.
Like Antichrist CGI fox. Yeah. So look, I thought it was hit and miss this year in terms of like all like the great movies. Obviously, COVID got in the way of some really big productions. I think next year we're stacked for, like, 2022. We're stacked for, like, some incredible films in the pipeline as well. So, really looking forward to that. But this year there were some real ones that stuck out to me. Number 5 for me, The French Dispatch by Wes Anderson. I would caveat it by saying I think if this were 2020, I don't think it would have made my top 5. But there was something so reliably great about Wes Anderson films, insofar as that, like, in a year where you have nonstop like CGI blur coming from Marvel and DC and every blockbuster feature now, it's so nice to have a kind of big buzz around a filmmaker who, although elements are indulgent for sure, he is crafting something that's so meticulous and so personal to him, and every frame has detail that means something to him and should mean something to the viewer as well. I just really dug it. I have to say, I found it weirdly emotional as well. Like, I found it like what I love about the Grand Budapest Hotel is that it's a flat out comedy to me, but there's like real deep kind of layers of kind of you invest in it, you kind of get that emotional reaction to it as well. And I feel like French Dispatch is very similar. I mean, ultimately it created this world that I wanted to spend time in. It showcased characters that I really wanted to hang out with. For anyone who doesn't know, Wes Anderson based the entire production on like short stories and author and writers that he would have, grown up reading as part of the New Yorker. Now, I've never read a New Yorker article in my life, and I think I still really, really enjoyed the movie, because I don't think, while that element is still there, and he makes countless references to incredible writers, most of which I have not read, it never felt exclusive. It never felt like it was trying to keep you out, or like this is like a nod towards certain elements of the audience. He created this world so expertly in the opening 10 minutes that all I wanted to do was spend time there. I thought it was effortlessly funny, again, surprisingly emotional, really well acted. And a lot of people are complaining about the kind of contrast, black and white, versus kind of how it kind of brings in color in certain elements. I think it worked perfectly. I think it helped to serve the story. So for me, I absolutely adored it, and I can't wait to watch it again. Number 4 for me, really quickly, is The Card Counter by Paul Schrader. I really dug this, and the reason I'm flying through it so quickly is I think if anyone wants to know how I feel about The Card Counter, just go back and read or listen to what I said about First Reformed, because they're very, very similar films. They're anchored by incredible performances. They're written and directed by Paul Schrader. It is a Paul Schrader film TM. Like, it couldn't be more a Paul Schrader film. It's that kind of existential kind of dread. It's about a guy who's trying to basically shift the encroaching tide and this inevitability. You know, in First Reformed, it's about this like the end of the world that is coming, and ultimately we're not able to do anything about the fact that we've destroyed our planet, etc. Whereas in this, it's about this kind of effervescent and kind of bubbling kind of and festering anger underneath the surface of this character who is trying to separate himself from his past so much, but finding it really, really hard because other characters in his world and kind of how he gets around his day is ultimately bringing him back to this awful event that's happened in his past. So yeah, it's really worth seeing. Very similar to First Reformed. I think First Reformed is probably a better film, but all in all, I really, really enjoyed the card counter, and Oscar Isaac is superb as he is in pretty much everything. Number 3 for me was The Killing of Two Lovers. This is the second film I watched in 2021. I watched it in January, and I was thinking to myself, if this doesn't end up in my top 5, then it's been a mesmerizing year of film. I'm glad to say it ends up in my top 5. It is directed by Robert Machoian. Apologies if I've butchered that name. You know, a really kind of small indie filmmaker who I really am excited to see new things by over the next few years. I think it's an incredible piece of work. It's really kind of about the fragility of the modern family, I guess. It's about two lovers who have separated. The wife has the kids and has a new partner, and the husband lives down the road with his father and is ultimately finding that separation really, really quite difficult. And it kind of bubbles up into this kind of really dramatic and really affecting kind of story between the two of them. It's only 90 minutes. It's really worthwhile, short, excellently produced, written, directed, shot, everything movie. So I would really highly recommend it. So yeah, then number 2 is, like yourself, Ethan, Dune. I sometimes, like, the best films leave you kind of speechless, really, and like, you know, like they kind of go without saying, like, and like I think the theater experience adds that, like, you know, when you can watch films and I think you can experience films to be very deep about it. And with Dune, like, I felt like I had experienced something massive. I really adored it and enjoyed it. As someone who really like loves going to cinemas and as much as I can, and obviously it's difficult in this day and age, like getting back into a cinema to watch Dune was a real treat. The spectacle of it is mesmerizing. I just thought it was so well, like everything about it was just big and bombastic. And I guess that some people have, like, you know, I think the majority of people really enjoyed it, but like I get some critiques that maybe it's a little too big and you know, it's like too epic and sometimes, but for me, I just really enjoyed it. I think I've read the book, the books. I think I've one condensed version of some of them. I don't think I've gone as far as Messiah. I don't know as much about Dune except for I read it when I was a little younger, and like it's really ambitious to go after this story. And I think Villeneuve does it impeccably well. He's been one of my favorite directors since like Incendi. Like, I mean, I probably butchered the pronunciation. You know, he's just, I think he consistently delivers incredible films that are just really well, like they're just the work of a master filmmaker, and I think that's what he is. And what I love about it is that it could have absolutely plummeted under the expectation of it, you know, insofar as that people really were, oh my god, how we could bring Dune to life, that's insane. Oh my god, now there's a part 1, if we don't support it, part 2 isn't coming, and oh my god, cinemas are under throat. You know, there was just so much pressure riding on it to kind of really do well. And the fact that it did as well as it did, I think, is a real testament to the quality of the film and like the importance of cinemas and theaters across the world as well. And kind of like, I'll buy the Blu-ray and I'll have a big kind of setup, hopefully at home, but it'll never recreate that kind of special feeling I felt watching it in the cinema. And last thing I'd say is that epic nature, like the second part 1 ended, I just wanted to go back into the world to visit part 2. And I haven't felt something like that since the Lord of the Rings films, in all honesty. And I know that's been quite a common kind of comparison, but I really just, I think it's an important one because I just felt completely, I just bought into everything. I just wanted to learn more about the world. I wanted to see more of the world. I want to see how this story concluded. Great performances, great action set pieces, really nice balance between the shed loads of kind of text and really difficult kind of you know, parts of the book to get through, and then kind of balancing it nicely with some kind of action set pieces and some really nice sci-fi. So yeah, all right, that's my number 2 without a doubt. And then number one is a film I wrote about actually for a film in Dublin that I just haven't been able to get on my head since I've seen it. I watched it last night again. That's the third time I've watched it this year. And it is Michael, I can't even think of the director's name, although I love it, Michael Sarnowski's Pig, which is obviously, you know, Nicolas Cage starring, Alex Wolff starring drama. It's hard to discuss Pig. As I say, some of the great films can almost just defy description. But I suppose what I would say about it is that it is something that starts out as, and was sold in as, another Nicolas Cage madcap adventure, right? And oh my God, he's doing this crazy movie. What's it about? Oh, it's about him trying to find his pig, and it's a revenge thriller. And what I love about that is it completely subverts that expectation, and that you're going in there looking for another Mandy, or another film that came out this year is Prisoners of the Ghostland, which Nicolas Cage was in. Again, it's kind of a revenge story as well. You know, a lot of filmmakers buy into that and just want Cage to play that role. What I love about Pig is that it absolutely isn't that. It starts off that way and alludes towards that, but ultimately becomes something and unfolds into something altogether different, which is like this tale of really deep sadness and grief and kind of retribution and pain and so many other things that is really punctuated by some excellent and subtle direction. Like, it's really not on the nose. It's really well rolled out, kind of one simple 90-minute 3-act kind of structure, just really simple and subtle and effective direction. And then two of my favorite performances of the year, which is Nick Cage and Alex Wolff. I mean, I think we forget just how good Nick Cage is because he fits a very particular type of role, or a very select few type of roles. Like, you would never throw him into like Power of the Dog with Benedict Cumberbatch. Like, for example, Nicolas Cage in that movie it'd be a different film. But ultimately, you know, if you put him in the right film, he can be incredible. And I think a lot of people expect those films to be Mandy these days, and expect them to be these big bombastic kind of madcap adventures, as I was saying. But like with Pig, he's just incredible. I think the performances in it are superb. The writing is superb. Again, it's about a story of you know, Robin, who's this recluse living in the Oregon wilderness, who's visited by a guy played by Alex Wolff called Amir, who basically gives him supplies for his truffles that he finds in the ground in the Oregon forest, goes back and sells them into some really rich restaurants, and you know, that's kind of his trade. One day his truffle pig is stolen, and then suddenly everyone's like, okay, great, it's going to be a revenge Nicolas Cage thriller. And it completely turns into something different. He goes back to the city, but at the same time he's revisiting his past. He's revisiting the errors he made in his past, and kind of what he tried to escape in the first place by leaving Portland to kind of go to live by himself as a recluse. And like, it's I for time's sake, I could spend so much time talking about this. What I loved about this is also kind of an added bonus is kind of what it says about us as a culture and how we consume content. Like, it takes real kind of, I think, just wonderful jabs at the ideas of eating in snobby restaurants, and like, you know, it's all about how many Michelin stars you have, or how about, you know, how many people are willing to pay €90 for a small appetizer kind of thing. And there's a reoccurring piece in it as well, where Alex Wolff's character is listening to classical music, but he's listening to classical music with a like narrative underneath telling him why classical music is the best thing and how you should enjoy classical music. And I just love that. I think it has the metal to kind of talk about why love for your craft is what drives art, as opposed to this kind of overriding snobbishness about, oh, this is slow pace and this is kind of whatever, so we must love it. I just think it's so good. As I say, I'm doing no justice by talking more about it. I think people need to go out there and experience it for themselves. I absolutely adored it, and I thought it was my pick for best of the year.
The slow realization, the kind of gradual realization of what Pig actually is just a really enjoyable thing to experience, because it does initially set itself up as that kind of boilerplate John Wick style revenge movie, and the longer you actually go through it, the less like that it is, and then it kind of comes back, but not really, because you're just looking at it in a very different way by the point of revenge or whatever. And so many revenge stories are about not dealing with grief. You know, it's about actually pushing past that feeling, whereas Pig explores that with so much empathy and so much perspective, while doing all those other things you said. You know, it's a really, really enjoyable film for that.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
Wolff,
I'd like
for being a supporting character, again, you think you have this sense of who he is and what his character's function is in that story, but you really don't at all. And again, the empathy that is explored there, one of probably Wolf's best performance. I thought it was brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought he was incredible. I have to say, like, I was floored by him. I haven't seen much by him. Was it he or his brother that was in Hereditary? I think it was himself.
He's Hereditary, yeah.
Yeah, he's really good in Hereditary, I have to say. And I think, he is a good actor. He's just never registered as a really good actor. And like the performance he gives in Pig is superb. I just think it's incredible because, again, it's as much his story as it is Nicolas Cage's story, and his story has nothing to do with finding the pig. He's kind of a supporting character to finding the pig, but ultimately it's about his, like, I can't go into it because obviously it's going to ruin things. As I say, I want people to look at it themselves, but yeah, I completely agree. The way, and like the film sets itself up to be that kind of revenge John Wick but with a pig kind of story as well. But I think it just really, especially at the start of the second act, it just takes a step back and goes, actually, you know what, this is the story we want to tell. And I just loved it. I was floored by it. Yeah, 10 out of 10 for me. It's going in the collection, I have to say. I can't wait to watch it again.
Awesome. Yeah, and is there any films that flew just under the radar then for your top five?
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, I love The Father, which I just thought was a film that the reason I loved it is because, like, there's so many films that are stage plays that are then translated to movies that for me just don't work. They feel like they have been translated from stage to film, and they don't always work from one medium to the other. The Father worked for me, and I just loved it. I thought it was a really impressive movie. The Kid Detective, which I think is just superb, is one of the funniest films I'd seen this year, along with Bad Trip, the Eric Andre film, which I just thought was super funny as well. And then Spencer, which is at the lower end to me. I think it has an awful lot of problems. Mainly its script, which I just felt I didn't really enjoy, but the direction, the performance, Celine Sciamma's DP does the cinematography for it. I've forgotten her name, but it's incredible looking. And then obviously Johnny Greenwood does an incredible job at the score. And the last one I'll say is Titan, which is Julia DiCarno. I could be saying that wrong again. Her feature film. Again, it narrowly misses it for me. I think we may be talking about it later. I'm not sure, Luke. I'm not sure what you're going with, but to me, there's two great movies in it. I don't think they all gel to be one great movie, but I so respect and love what it's trying to do. And there's some set pieces in it that I think are just it provided some of the most exhilarating cinema I've seen all year. So that narrowly misses my top five, Titan. And I can't wait to see, Hand of God, Power of the Dog, Petite Mama, Licorice Pizza, so many more I need to get to this year. So plenty more to see.
So number 5 for me is actually Come On, Mike Mills' film. This is Joaquin Phoenix plays a radio journalist who is going across America interviewing young kids about their families, about their perspective of the future and different things. And he ends up looking after his nephew, who he doesn't really have much of a relationship with, because his sister, played by Felicity Huffman, has to go to look after her husband, who's having these mental health difficulties while they're estranged. Phoenix and Hoffman haven't really spoken at all over the last year because they had a falling out over their mother and what is happening to her. And it is basically Phoenix and this kid going from city to city, and just it's about their experiences. And like Mill's previous film, 20th Century Women, it is just really focusing in on these characters and their perspectives and their lives, and just kind of letting them experience all these new things, particularly through the young guy played by Woody Norman. I think kid actors, they're so much better these days than they were when I was a lad, when they were all terrible. This kid Norman, like, he's so eccentric and so weird in the way that kids are without being cloying and irritating. Or when he is irritating, it's because kids can be irritating. And the relationship that he has with Joaquin Phoenix is just this very lived in and very real thing that you watch develop. and the film it's shot entirely in black and white, and it has this real feeling through the interviews, through the way that they weave from city to city, of being this memory in progress for this kid. And he's kind of asked at one point, are you even going to remember any, or he asks, am I going to remember any of this? It's just such an interesting way of looking at how kids experience these very serious things, and what they take on and what they don't, how they feel. And I think Nils just has a really interesting and really exhilarating way of capturing the way that we feel things in the moment and how we look back at the things that we feel. Number 4 for me is Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised, the documentary that came out earlier this year. I think there's a lot of kind of sitting on the footage documentaries that get put out, but this one has a particularly cultural relevance in taking this summer of music festival performances that were happening the same summer as Woodstock, and showing these Black performers in the middle of New York, in the middle of the sweltering hot summer. And the way that the film just gives this footage and these performers platform to speak for themselves, and to see how all these names, these kind of living legends, your Stevie Wonders, to see them in their pomp, in their prime, and just see in real time how brilliant they were, and not to clog it down with too many interviews. And yet whenever there are interviews showed in the film with people that were there on the day, because they've not seen this footage, and because it's this nearly dreamlike thing that is decades old, that you kind of almost lose having happened to you, to see them re-experience it pairs with the footage in such a fascinating way. And I just thought it was just such a energizing film, and such a light hand for a documentary, but a light hand used in a good way, Number 3, I've got French Dispatch. I think what I really liked about the French Dispatch is you have Wes Anderson, who's a director who's constantly accused of being like all style and no substance, and he both doubles down on that by I think every subsequent film of Anderson's retreats more intricately and more introvertedly into his style. Each one is more of a Wes Anderson film than the last, and that's certainly the case for this. It's weaving in all these different techniques, the animation and all that Néil was talking about, the different uses of perspectives and of color, and it's just this very fussily assembled magazine in and of itself. But I think it's also such a really interestingly personal film. Like, I think that you really have a lot of the substance in there of Anderson's own personal perspective on why we tell stories, and who the people that tell stories are. I think that there's a section at the end of the film where this kind of not James Baldwin journalist figure is talking about experiencing art and experiencing stories and telling stories. And I think it's such a revealing window into Anderson as a filmmaker. And I think it's one of those that, again, by the time that his detractors get to it, they've probably switched off, but it's right there for them to see if they want to see it, if they want to find it. And
I agree.
It is just, I think it's just a very easy watch. I went to see it twice, and I think you're always going to have in that kind of anthology story some sections that you feel more attached to than others, or just enjoy more than others. But for this, I really think there's in each section there's a lot that I definitely appreciated. Number 2, I have Titan or Titan, Gilles Ducarneau's film, which again, we apologize for anything that we mispronounce. We usually write these things down for a reason. But I saw this in somewhat unusual circumstances because I saw it in Austria and it's a French film and it was subtitled in German. So it was a challenge to see how much of this I could actually understand. But how much of it you're actually ever going to understand is not a given anyway, even if it were subtitled in English. It is the story of a young woman who, after a childhood car accident that left her with a brace in her spine, has a sexual fascination, attraction to cars, and is impregnated after having sex with a car. And also she's a serial killer. And that's not even really the plot. The actual plot doesn't even happen until after you've seen all of that. So by the time Titan actually starts telling its story, you already either love it or hate it, which I think is a very interesting way of telling a story. And you kind of, just by telling people that, I think they get this presupposition of how the film is. And similarly to Pig, I think actually the slow realization of what Titan has to say about identity is what I really took from it. I think it's exploration of gender identity, or just of personal identity, and how this woman responds to her trauma, of how she feels about violence, or how she feels in response to the way that she is treated as the film unfolds. It's such a wide-ranging and such a curious perspective that I was just really brought along for the whole ride, even though I couldn't necessarily tell what was happening. And yet it's so visually well told by Ducarneau and her team that actually I could pretty much understand what was happening, and I could give you a full plot synopsis, you know? And I think that's the measure of a good filmmaker, is somebody that can make you feel a lot of different things, from like nail-biting anxiety and discomfort to like really powerful and emotional elements that show up in the story, and to do it primarily with the visuals. There's not a lot of talking anyway. So it's one that you might have to take a few pinches of salt going into, just because you might take the story up a certain way. And yeah, I think by the nature, even without disliking it, you're going to have very different experiences to it. But I think it's definitely the kind of story that you should check out. And then number one for me, I mean, I already know what it is. Number one for me is Petite Mama. Celine Sciamma's follow-up to Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Such a very different film, and you know, to have come out in such a relatively short space of time following that massive success. As far as I know, Sciamma directed the film during lockdown, but it's not a overtly lockdown film. It's just a film that she was able to put together relatively quickly that highlights so many of her strengths as a filmmaker and as one of the best filmmakers working today. Her ability to work with such young actors, her ability to be so economical with her storytelling, and again, so visual with her storytelling. And again, that curiosity and that empathy with characters and with different people's experiences comes across so well here. Petite Mama is this kind of fantastical story of this young girl who she's just left the nursing home where her grandmother has passed away. She's gone back to the family home with her parents, who are kind of finishing up with the house. But her mother is having a very difficult time emotionally dealing with all this. And the girl wakes up one morning and her mother has left. She goes out into the local woods where her mother had grown up at this family home, and finds a little girl who looks pretty much exactly like her and does all the things that her mom told her that she did as a kid, and goes and visits this girl's house. And it's just this relationship between this little girl and her mother as a little girl that is such an interesting way of exploring the ideas that are being explored here. And it's just such a joy to watch because the kids are having a great time. it's kind of Miyazaki like in the way that it is touching in on quite serious topics and quite serious things going on at the fringes of this story, while still being so warm and fun, just wide ranging in terms of the emotional buttons it's pushing. And it does all that in about 70 minutes, I think. And with, such a small cast and crew. And I think what I find so brilliant about Siama is that there are a lot of similarities you can see in this and a previous film of hers, like, say, Tomboy. And yet you can see not only the ways in which she's developed as a filmmaker, but the ways in which her perspective has broadened from a film that was already brilliant, and I think that's what I have this as number one, because to have somebody that's so talented and to see them getting better is just such an exciting thing to see. But I think we're all similar in that at any given day you can throw up 3 or 4 or 5 different films for a list like this. Something like First Cow equally could have been 5 or 1 or any of the numbers on this list. Shiva Baby, which I thought was such a promising, like a really fun and exciting debut this year, and again, such interesting character work. Matrix Resurrections, just for the way that it approaches kind of blockbuster filmmaking and the kind of never-ending franchise world that we live in now, and the way that it does that while also still being a functional version of that, I thought was really exciting. Spencer, which Néil mentioned again, I think for me it came down to, is that Lorraine's best film, or does it stack up with even his previous film from last year, Emma? I think it's great, but I think Emma I would have had on my list last year, so if it's not better than that, then I guess it misses out. But again, that's how arbitrary these things can be. And I think even in a year where things get delayed constantly and you're never quite sure of what you're going to see, we all came up with some great films there, and we've all still got so many great films from this year to see, and hopefully it's the same for next year.
Yeah, agree. And and just one thing that came into my head there, I mean, I just love you mentioned the use of black and white and come on, and it just reminded me of, I think you mentioned, Jess, as well, the use of black and white in passing. And it's funny because my immediate reaction when I see a kind of indie filmmaker using black and white is, you think it's, your immediate jump to is, there's no need, like it's being done for kind of to heighten kind of the experience, but like only for the sake of maybe eliciting this sense of being better. Whereas I haven't seen Come On, but I love the description you said, which is like it makes it feel like it's a memory in progress, which I love. And passing, I mean, makes sense. And like I've seen little bits of passing, and I love actually how that photography is used. And then obviously the one I have seen, French Dispatch, I love the use of black and white for kind of like heightening the experience the right way, which is kind of black and white and suddenly bursts of color to kind of show that some of these characters are like there's a big story in the French Dispatch, for example, deals with art and painting and sculpting, etc. And like the way it's utilized in that way is just superb. And the one last thing I'd say on your picks, while you were explaining the French Dispatch, reminded me of one quote. I'm going to butcher it, but it's something along the lines of, make it sound like you wrote it that way on purpose, which is Bill Murray's line, like in every scene he's in. And it just made me think, I mean, for writers and reviewers, that is the best advice you'll ever get.
Absolutely, yeah.